background in wrestling, and particularly, you didn't get fed from a silver spoon. You know, like you had to grind your way out, starting from a small wrestling program. And you know, I know how it's like. When I started my team, we never had a full roster. It was always like 10 guys in, and we'd lose every match pretty much by forfeits. You know, so how is that like coming up in that rank?
You know, I think in hindsight, it kind of was the best thing for me. Even now, like there was no time. I've done a lot more like physically challenging practices and things, but there was no time that I remember it being as hard as when I came up wrestling when I was like 16, 17, because I came in, I literally started at 16. You know, I tried to go out for the team at 15. We didn't have a lot of money for me to get back and forth to school or anything. So it wasn't until I was 16, a junior, and I'm wrestling kids like, you know, they've been wrestling since they was 4 years old. And, you know, they had a lot more money in their schools and a lot more, you know, kind of background and resource for it. So we, like you said, we would always be losing. We always be the last seed of the tournaments, and we would go against the best team out there. But it taught me a lot mentally, I think, about like how to, you kind of got to get over it at some point. And I didn't really get it then, but in hindsight, I think that was like really where you hear it said a lot, like, oh, wrestling is where, you know, the best fighters come from, or, you know, you should start off your kid in wrestling or anything like that. I think it's really just the mentality of it that kind of, you get over that I got over losing quick.
There's
you know what I mean?
There's a selection process that goes on. Like the very, very toughest, strongest, most athletic, most like tough-minded people make it to the high, because like the truth is it's hard, it's brutal, and there's a lot of hardship along the way, and there's few rewards. Like I mean, when you think about wrestling, like okay, what's a career for a wrestler? It's like Olympics. Yeah. And then you can be a coach at a college or something, but university or something. But like it's different from other combat sports. I feel like boxing, the top of the pyramid is what. You're making hundreds of millions of dollars. You can be Floyd Mayweather, exactly. Like, and I think that might play a role into like selecting like some of the very toughest people that come out of, you know, wrestling into other sports.
Probably, because I can remember like times, especially in high school, I would be physically trying to fight my dad to go to wrestling practice. You know, he didn't see that same goal, especially coming from Detroit, because, you know, we had Floyd Mayweather come out of Michigan, and you would look at Floyd and be like, oh, you know, he's hundreds and hundreds of $1 million and, you know, helped his whole family come up. But in wrestling, you look around and it was none of that. You know, you can go to the Olympics, you can make 10,000 and kind of get out. I think where I kind of differ from a lot of wrestlers that get into MMA is I went out for wrestling with the intention of getting into fighting. You know, when I saw fighting for the first time, I was 15, and then I just was like, okay, you know, I can't go to an MMA gym or anything like that, so I'll just go out for the wrestling team. But it still was that same type of, nobody else saw the vision but me, you know what I mean? And that's kind of how it's...
You know, it's funny, you just touched on a point. I know, like, we can go on this, you know, in so many different ways, but you mentioned something, you started when you were 16, is that what you said? And, you know, I think I've always believed it's a kind of like a crucial age, you know, for any fighter, like it's like that age between 14 and 18. Those are the crucial years. I feel like, you know, we see this a lot in gyms, like parents really pushing their kids and making them run sprints at 8, 9, and then at 18, they kind of, they burned, they're peaked. And like you just said, I relate a lot to what you just said. I'm sure Dave does too. And most people have been doing this for like 20 years like we have. We'll relate to it. Like, you couldn't keep me out of the gym. Yeah. Like, there's nothing you could have done to not go, like, oh, I'm going to go train. Like, I don't care if my knee is broken. I don't care if it's raining. I don't care. I show up sick. Like, it doesn't matter what the circumstances were. You just do what you got to do, right? And I really believe that, you know, best thing you can do if you're around someone like that with potential is just support them and make it a little bit easier, perhaps. But you just hit the nail on the head, man. Like, it's just like you can't force someone to be someone who they're not. Like, it doesn't matter how, even if you have the talent, if your mind is not there, it's not made for you.
You know, and one thing that makes wrestling kind of unique compared to all the other sports, it's the one sport that doesn't cut you, right? Like football, you get cut. Basketball, you get cut. So they only get the top. Quit. You have to have natural ability to get in usually, right? Yeah. But wrestling, it's about the toughest guy. Yeah. And wrestling coaches know that, and they push you hard. Like, I remember
physically, it's like probably the hardest sport there is. Like, really, maybe gymnastics is like hard like that. But probably not as hard as wrestling.
I'll tell you, like when I started with my team, I started a sophomore year also. So I was like, same idea. I started watching the UFCs, saw Dan Severn, Matt Hughes, and stuff like that. I'm like, okay, I'm going to go the wrestling path first, because there was no MMA gyms back like in 1997, you know? So when I got there day one, there was like 60 people on the mats. It's just like, you couldn't run, you know? It was like a full circle, everybody's around.
Yeah.
You know, at the end of the season, it was like 13 people, you know? And because coach
Everybody
just
quit.
pushed you hard as hell, you know? Nobody could stand, you know?
Yeah.
Like, there's one thing about having a tough upbringing, because like something I read also that you used to sleep in the gym, and like there'd be no heating, and it's in the winter and stuff. Like, I don't know, most people probably never have to go through that, you know? So to me, it makes me wonder, like, what if I had come up working with like the best team, infinite resources, you know, like, would I have become better because I've had more around me, or would I have been spoiled, you know? Because
That's a good point.
it would have been like, oh, I just have everything, I take it for granted, you know? Because when you have that tough upbringing, you don't take anything for granted. You know, when you have a coach, when you have training partners, when you have good facilities, like, man,
Amen.
this is something you treasure. It's like somebody who's never starved, and you try to get them to cut weight, they're dying.
It's like being born rich.
Yeah.
Whereas, like, you don't see the value in money when you're like your father's a millionaire. It's like I'm with you, man. That's a great point.
You don't know how to make it. Yeah. I mean, I can just remember, because I had to wrestle against these kids that had been wrestling since they were 4 or 5 years old, especially when I got to college. That's kind of when it clicked for me, and I got to like a different level of it, and guys had been, not only were they wrestling since 4 or 5, they were the best of that. So my physical abilities wasn't enough to kind of, you know, we know from jiu-jitsu, like, sometimes it's the technique of it. And there's nothing that if you don't understand that technique, then there's nothing that you can really do to make up for it. So it always made it to where I had to work 10 times harder than they did in order to level the playing field, if that makes sense. So I feel like maybe if I would have had, you know, better situations and better coaching, and I went to like the type high school where, you know, everybody was coming out and already a state champ, you know, 4-time state champs and all this, I think maybe that wouldn't have been, I wouldn't have had the same, I may have been better technically, and I may have been better overall, but I think one of the big reasons that I've got where I am now so young is because I've just had that kind of work ethic to try and beat the next guy, even though he's got fucking 10 years on me. You know what I mean? Ain't nothing I can do about it. You got more 10 years or more technique. It's like
it's what makes you strong at the end of the day. It's just having that resolution to do it too. Like, I think that in itself is an exercise. Like, going back to Dave's point, it's kind of like that hardship. I think that right there sculpts you in a way that even, I don't know, I'd rather have that journey of hardship, you know, and a smaller reward than that. Like, you get handed everything, and then, you know, with no hardship. There's no sculpting of character. You know, you're missing on the journey. You know, you're missing on the most precious thing, which is actually battling really hard.